Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on smart leadership for enabling urban transformation. As you all know, we have an amazing panel today comprising of leaders with very extensive yet varied nature of portfolios in the urban development sector. So we are going to get to the actual agenda in just a moment, but first I would like to briefly introduce our panel of speakers for the day. Our moderator for the day is Clémence Vidal de Lablache. She is the Deputy Director of the French Agency for Development in India since September 2018, and she leads AFD's urban development portfolio here. Prior to this, Clémence worked for 6 years as an urban development team leader. And in addition to her extensive experience in driving urban projects, she has spearheaded AFD's urban lab, piloted in Burkina and Tunisia, and has worked as a development practitioner in Uganda, Burundi, and South Africa for over 4 years. We welcome you, Clémence, on the panel, and thank you for accepting to be the moderator for today to lead us through the discussion. Our panelists for the day, the first panelist is Mr. Raj Cherubal, who is the CEO of Chennai Smart City Limited. Prior to this, he was Director of Projects for Chennai City Connect, which is a platform for industry associations and civic organizations that deliver world-class quality of life, infrastructure, and services. Mr. Cherubal has worked across a diverse range of urban projects, which range from projects in sustainable transportation to sustainable financing of infrastructure projects, redevelopment of business districts and regional plans. He has also worked to promote decentralization and good urban governance in India. And in addition to this, on projects that involve economic freedom for entrepreneurs who work in the informal sector. Our second speaker for the day is Ashraf Adam. He is the Chief Executive Officer at Mandela Bay Development Agency. Ashraf has over 28 years of extensive experience as a policy advisor, senior manager, and a thought leader across various spheres of business and government. Before this, he was the executive director for economic development at South African Local Government Association. Apart from this, Ashraf has attended conferences globally and has contributed to these conferences, which include the World Urban Forum in Medellin, Municipal Climate Partnership in Senegal, and as well as the Cities Alliance Summit in London. Our third speaker is Vidya Mohan Kumar, who is the founder and principal of Urban Design Collective and a domestic expert in the cities program, where she mentors the cities of Hubli and Agartala. Vidya is an architect and urban designer with over 15 years of experience in India, Ireland, as well as in the States. Vidya founded UDC back in 2011. It's basically a collaborative platform for architects, designers, and planners to create livable cities, of course, through a participatory planning approach. Her clientele ranges from state governments, ULBs, to private sector firms and NGOs. In addition to this, Vidya serves as a governing board member for the Center for Living City in the States. Our fourth speaker, Dr. Rajesh Pandya, is the Deputy Municipal Commissioner for the Surat Municipal Corporation. He has been working in the urban development sector in India for over 30 years, and specifically would like to mention here his tenure of 13 plus years as a town planner. Present, he heads the departments of traffic, BRTS and public parks in the Surat Municipal Corporation. And in addition, he holds the posts of general manager in the Surat Smart City SPV office and in the Dream City company. Apart from this, Mr. Pandya has also been actively involved in academics and research, and he has published widely. So I welcome all the panelists today, and we look forward to the discussion. So without further ado, let's begin. Over to you, Clémence, to please lead us through the discussion. Thank you. Just a little housekeeping announcement. We'll be running a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to put in your questions. There is a Q&A panel on the right of your screen. So pop your questions in there, and we will make sure your questions are taken up in the Q&A at the end. So thank you. Over to you, Clemence.
Thank you, Swapnil. So welcome, and thank you for joining us at this webinar as part of the Learn to Connect, Collaborate and Co-Create webinar series that's hosted by NIUA, seminar on smart leadership to enable urban transformation. I'm really glad and honored to be moderating this panel. As Swapnil said, we have 4 amazing panelists with leadership positions across levels of government, with the private sector, civil society, with very strong personal involvement in driving urban projects, planning, but also contributing to urban policy development. So really looking forward to this conversation. Maybe I'll just add 2 small elements to the housekeeping rules before we start. One of the things that I've struggled with preparing for this conversation is that obviously urban leadership is in many ways situational. It's very linked to place, a time, an ecosystem of stakeholders, and so it might be a bit difficult to generalize, to take general lessons and universal advice, but as much as possible, I really encourage you, because we are in this dynamic of learning and encouraging this collaboration, as much as possible, try to illustrate your thoughts on urban leadership through personal experience and learnings. Try to really be concrete in the way that your also leadership journey has influenced the skills, the strategies that you develop. So that was the first point. And second point is I'd like to encourage this as a dialogue. It's obviously a bit more complex than on live panels, but in that spirit, please. We'll go for rather short interventions rather than individual presentations, which may have been the case in previous webinar series. And of course, apologies in advance for maybe cutting you short at some point. That will be also to manage time and make sure, as Swapnil said, that we have the time to take Q&As from the audience at the end of this session. So over the next hour, the objective is to hear from you on reflections regarding urban leadership. We're hosting these in a very specific time of the COVID crisis. I think the first webinar series organized by NIUA was on the COVID response and how cities were on the front line of this COVID response. I'm doing a little bit of advertisement here. The recording is online, so feel free to check it out. And that's only one of the very complex challenges that cities have to face. There's obviously the public health challenges, but also this comes as an additional layer to the very uncertain and fast-moving environment, issues around emerging issues around job creation, climate change. So very, very complex set of challenges that urban leaders face today. So I'd like to take the time to get to know you more, each of the panelists, and through that maybe illustrate these challenges, these difficulties, and the strategies that urban leaders are developing today to address this fast-moving environment. So maybe starting with you, Raj, given the breadth of your experience, which has taken you to Chennai's smart city as a CTO today, in your experience, who are we talking about when we talk about urban leadership? Are urban leaders, elected officials, bureaucrats? Do you today work in your capacity as Smart City CEO with other forms of urban leadership? I mean, could you walk us through how they contribute to this problem solving and strategies?
Sure. Thank you so much for making me part of this amazing panel. I think, I can speak from Chennai's point of view. I think we are starting, Chennai and Indian cities are starting from such a very low base in terms of the quality of life of a city. Even advanced cities, it cannot be a one-man show or a one-woman show or even a one-team show, right? So I always believe that all the things that we have been able to do in Chennai, whether it's smart city projects or other projects, came from network of networks. And some of the members of the networks or institutions in the network were either part of this government bureaucrats, elected representatives, etc., past and present. And many of them are also from the outside. So it could be civil societies, NGOs, individual experts, people like Vidya on the panel, for example. Different people have contributed to these projects for a very long time, because these projects, unlike maybe a Paris or a London, which has been in existence for 300 years, you've built capacity, you have built standards, you are at a level where you can take certain decisions. Here in Indian cities, that's pretty near impossible to take those decisions, whether it's a simple sidewalk to a complicated project. And unfortunately or fortunately, now we have even bigger problems. So you have the pandemic, you have the elephant in the room, which is the climate change. Even experts have difficulty figuring out what these problems are and what are we supposed to do as a city. So I think even if you set aside climate change and COVID and everything else, even catching up with a Paris or a London in terms of quality of life itself is a Herculean task in an Indian city. So it clearly cannot be one or two people or a few people as a team. It has to be a huge network, and the leadership will come from being able to bring the best out of these individuals and institutions in these networks. Whether it's an AFD from France, whether it's an organization in Delhi or Surat, for example. We've learned from Surat and the interesting things they're doing. So I think we don't have time for 50, 100 years to sit back, relax, and think about how to solve problem. We need to move fast, and if the answer comes from South Africa, so be it. If it comes from Calcutta, so be it. But how do we adapt to the local conditions? How do we tap into the various experts that is in the city, whether it's architects or climate change experts or any other kind of disability access experts and so on and so forth? Unless we tap and build that network, strengthen the network, and then help city tap into the network, there cannot be any progress. So for me, definition of leadership is not individual, it's a network.
Thank you so much. Yes, what I note is this issue of network, and how urban leadership, successful urban leadership, will be able to leverage these, whether it's local network, expertise network, or tapping into the global, the global influence and global lessons. So that's whether for improving quality of life or tackling some of these emerging challenges. Ashraf, you bring a South African expertise, 30 years of experience in the urban development space in South Africa and globally. Today with your organization, Mandela Bay Development Agency, you're leading large-scale city transformations. Maybe you can, of course, feel free to respond as well and build into your answers. If there's any reflections from hearing some of the other panelists, but any specific urban leader, urban figure, any individual or collective, any network that has influenced your leadership style today at the helm of MBDA?
Sorry, my apologies. So I'll deal with that question and on who might have inspired me towards the end of this session. Towards the end of my contribution. But I think Raj's point is quite important in that the idea of networks and networks within networks are fundamental to understanding an urban governance and urban leadership, because we need to understand the complexities of urbanization. Often planners think it's merely the interventions in space or planning and design of space. But there are fundamental other things that come into being. The issue of why people urbanize, what sacrifices poor people are prepared to make by living in shanty towns and informal settlements and things like that. and why they are prepared to make those kinds of sacrifices. What are the different components of the urban settlement, and how does the informal feed of the formal and the formal feed of the informal? And this whole issue of formality and informality is something that becomes quite important in understanding the complexities of urbanization. And in that context, because planning and urban development is fundamentally about the allocation of resources, it becomes political. And in that context, the networks that Raj has mentioned become extremely important, because you need to be able to engage with those networks as you go along, particularly when you've moved beyond the planning phase and you start budgeting and you need to begin to allocate resources. Then all the various tensions come in, because why are you spending money here and not there, even though you might have gone through an entire engagement process and things. In that context, once you begin to implement these big projects, we get to understand that development work is actually tough work. It is much easier said than done to deliver sewage infrastructure or road infrastructure or whatever infrastructure in urban areas, because there are so many contending parties and networks. But also, particularly if you look at India, look at South Africa, the high levels of structural unemployment and poverty make people desperate for work, and therefore would do anything to engage in that kind of work. So you need to be able to manage that. So the role of the leader is to engage around those kinds of things. One of the projects here, which is funded by the German Development Bank, is actually, we've had to sit down with gangsters who would normally shoot at each other and get them to cooperate with each other. And we've managed to do that. But it's come through 5 and 6 years of failure before we got to that 6 months of success. And so it's that kind of thing where you need to begin to simplify and things. So finally, what about leadership? I think firstly, you need to be authentic. You need to be yourself, and you need to see your commitments through to your staff particularly. You need to be politically aware, and you need to understand the political factors. The values, well, I'd like to think that the values I've developed over the years come from a combination of my personal growth and development, my parents in terms of honesty and integrity and looking after people's money and how you look after other people's money, my role within the freedom struggle and the values of socialism and Marxism and understanding the various processes of change. And I think that, maybe it's a bit cheesy, but since I do work for the Mandela Bay Development Agency in the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality, our founding president, Nelson Mandela, always said, it seems impossible until it is done. And he also said that, and this is what I really guide my life by, even before I read it, is that it's not enough to have lived. You must have made a difference in the life of others while you were alive. So those are the philosophies which guide me. Thank you.
So much. It's interesting because it's true. I framed the introduction as what are the skills that leaders need, and I think it's really interesting to think about values as well. Values of authenticity, of integrity, commitment, and the skills like being politically aware, being willing and able to engage with all of the networks, including the informal ones, as you were pointing out, are often, key factors of success. Being able to read that, that environment. That's absolutely. I think that speaks a lot to projects that I've seen in South Africa or in India. Maybe I'll hand over the floor to Vidya. So Vidya, you work with a wide range of clients as a founder, principal of the UDC, Urban Design Collective, on a wide range of projects. Maybe kind of echoing some of the thoughts or the initial conversation that has started on the values. What are some of the strategies, tactics, processes, values that you bring? And that you think are important in you successfully leading and delivering urban design projects. And maybe you can speak a little bit to your role in the Cities program, which is the convening space for this webinar. But I know that you have experience beyond the program in the 2 cities that you mentor, Hubli and Agartala, in that context.
Thanks, Lamont. I just want to say it's a real honor to be on this panel. I feel very humbled that I was called to be on a panel on smart leadership. It's also given me an opportunity to think about it, and particularly from the point of view of the values. And I truly echo what Ashraf just sort of went over in terms of what it requires to be in this space. Actually, I don't want to talk about like leading anything, because it's not about leadership, as Raj pointed out as well. It's about how you can sort of enable things, right? And so Urban Design Collective is a collaborative platform, and the original idea of starting a platform like this was to give sort of voice to a lot of people that to as many different people as can be in a platform of this nature, to express themselves about cities, about the things that are bothering them, and to start thinking about them critically and not just complain about it, right? So like we need some constructive action. I think a critical value that we always look for when we're working or when we're working with other people is empathy. And I think it's the quality of being able to empathize with the people that you're working with, the situation that you're working with is goes a really long way in enhancing our own understanding of what is it that we're dealing with. I mean, we let's face it, right? It's extremely complex. Like even now in this current pandemic situation, like everything has a sort of domino effect, and to be able to get a grasp on all of the aspects that make up this complex ecosystem that we're all a part of and we're all trying to work with. I think it's important, to be able to empathize, at so many levels, and that's something that I think is a critical quality that, we try to instill, or we try to, work with people who identify with us on that level. And so our modus operandi is participatory planning, right? Like, and just if I had to just expand that definition of participatory planning, it's not just about like, oh, we involved these people in the process, we met these people, we had these meetings. It's really not about that. It's about enabling others. It's about enabling and empowering other people to be part of the problem solving exercise. We work with a very wide range of stakeholders. So we work with school kids, high school kids, we work with college students, we work with communities, we work with cities. Like so it's also for us, like just in like within our own office to build our repertoire and our skill sets to be able to deal with the problems that we have in front of us. It really helps us to have a multi-stakeholder engagement, across all age groups, across all genders, across all economic strata. I think that really enables us to understand what's going on there and respond both creatively as well as contextually to it. I think at UDC, personally, I believe that it needs to be an empowering environment. I work with a lot of young people, and I think it's important to allow them to be observant, to be able to analyze for themselves, and to be able to put forth their ideas, because we need more people coming across as problem solvers. And concomitant to that would be giving credit where it's due, and I think that's a very important aspect as well. Like you've got to let everyone be a hero. I mean, only then can you nurture that sense of I can do this and I want to do this. And this requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of energy, requires a lot of passion, and to also continue. So when I say empowering environment, it's also about nurturing that energy and passion and channeling it in the right way so that it comes out as something constructive. We do this internally in our office. We do this with all the people that we are working with outside. We look for these similar qualities with our collaborators, other people who, from other disciplines, who also in turn enrich what we do. So in that sense, I think, I put empathy on top just to sort of like wrap it up, I would put empathy on top. I would put empowerment after that. And at the end of it, I would say, you have to be very, very conscious about giving credit where it is due.
Thank you so much, Vidya. I think I'll bounce off one of the you've very nicely wrapped up the so I'll just bounce off another one of your sentences. Really struck a chord is you have to let everyone be a hero. And I think that allowed me to lead off kind of in the second phase of the discussion, and I'll hand over the floor to Dr. Pandya in a minute. But maybe taking my experience and the conversation around urban leadership from France. I think we're seeing, and the discussion has already touched upon part of that. We're seeing really a shift in terms of what is understood to be successful urban leadership. For some of you who may be familiar with France, we've had a real transformation in the built environment, but also in the ways that cities, in the attractiveness of cities in terms of job creation, in the ways that cities have marketed themselves, in the way that they've engaged with their citizens, and a real transformation, especially of regional capitals. So outside of Paris, cities like Bordeaux on the Atlantic coast, Lyon close to the Alps, Nantes, that have seen dramatic transformation over the past 20 years. And the narrative was initially quite similar between these different environments and quite linked to one hero, to a charismatic mayor who, had a vision, often very long political tenure. So the idea, the narrative was also, had the time to drive change over, 15, 20 years. That's the case in Bordeaux with Alain Juppé, in Lyon with Gérard Collomb. So, often individuals with a vision, with a tenure, with also a national mandate, national politicians that have access to the political and the financial resources also. And so, I'd like for us to spend a bit of time on whether that vision still holds. Is that narrative, of the hero or of a strong individual leader who champions a vision for his city? It's often a man. We'll come back to that at the end of the conversation. Is that still valid in complex, uncertain environments that we've just described? And so, Dr. Pandya, I wanted to maybe turn to Surat. So I know we have two representatives from Chennai on the panel today, but Surat is a city that I know a little bit more. One of the most dynamic city in terms of demographic growth, in terms of economic growth in India, in Gujarat. I don't know if some people in the audience know that, but if you're planning to buy a diamond for your loved one soon, there's a good chance that it will be polished in Surat. And so around this dynamism,
South
Surat
Africa.
has had from South Africa, polished in Surat and sold in Antwerp. That might be the link. And so around these challenges of rapid economic and demographic growth, the cities has had major successes like the flagship BRT and basically building a mobility, a collective and urban transport system from scratch, but also the Dream City project, which is linked to the diamond trade, which is I was mentioning this anecdote. So for you, Dr. Pandya, what are some of the challenges, the difficulties that urban leaders face when driving such kind of projects? What is your experience on projects like Dream City? And over your 30-year engagement with Surat, have you seen expectations of constituents and residents change? And do you feel like we're still in this model with a strong individual leader, or do you see that those expectations changing?
Thank you, Clemens. First of all, I'll thank the organizers for making me a part of this webinar. Generally, government officers, especially municipal officers, are never seen as leaders because we lack the quality of leaders. Municipal, I think Raj will support me, that municipal, it is very difficult to be a leader in an urban scenario. I'll tell you a wide range of services within the city call for different activities, right from planning, execution to operation and management. Although most of the urban local bodies have expertise in the conventional fields like water supply, drainage, road, but when it comes to new issues like BRT or IT components or some twisting is there, when we move out of the natural or conventional modes, we are flat. We don't have much exposure outside. So what the main urban local bodies are lacking, as you asked, is capacity building. We don't have capacity building. We just move on the road track we have. So we are lacking capacity building in most of the urban local bodies. And as to the quality of a leader you are asking, especially in urban context, a successful leader in urban context, he should have good vision. He should visualize things as they are coming, and he should be good at planning. Planning, when we plan for a thing, we have n number of alternatives, and a good leader is one who should be able to select. I cannot say there is never a single right thing, but he should be able to select what is the best out of what is available. And another thing is he should be good at executing the project also, because execution is a part where we mostly the projects are delayed or expected. Now, most important is that the leader should be bold and confident enough to claim the responsibility and ownership of the project. Generally, if you look to the government departments, we lack responsibility. We claim, as you were telling, team, whole team is there. But a team should also have a leader. Maybe the team leader of the team. He should be responsible. He should not be afraid to say that my project may fail. Like we have a number of innovative projects in cities. These are very innovative. But we should be confident. Let me take the responsibility. If it fails, it is my responsibility. I will take this direction. He should be a learner. Nothing comes from where. I think, Clemens, you had rightly pointed out that one alternative is not applicable to other cities also. There is not a cut and paste solution. Every city had its own demography. It has got its socio-economic cultural aspect. So he should be able to find out what are the best components available to within the and what are the best things that are suitable to the local issues. That is why a leader's the capacity should be applicable. In urban local bodies, the political and bureaucratics, they have a lot of interferences. And these are challenges that which our leader has to face successfully. He should be able to convince the local bodies or his bureaucratic seniors, look, this is the solution. First of all, he should be able to explain to them, this is the problem. This is the problem statement. And this is the answer. And this is the way we should do it. There are a number of hurdles will come into his way. People will suggest other alternatives, but he should be able to explain it to them. This is the right way. I will lead the way. And he should go through this and he should drive the project. Let me tell you, again and again, we are meeting different seminars, webinars. What we discuss success stories of X city, Y city, Z city. Yes, but let us be frank and discuss the unsuccess stories also, failures also. If X cities has failed in BRTS, why it has failed? Let me explain my failure. If I have failed in any XYZ project, I should be confident. I should come to you and tell you I have failed in this way, but I have failed because of this reason. Please don't repeat it. If I have fallen into some wrong notion, that I should guide you. Don't follow. So this is a right way a leader should. Also, let us share the success stories, but we should share the failure stories also. And this is the reason why we are coming on a platform, not only to pat our own backs. Okay, I have done good, I have done good. Yes, I have done good, but I have to tell you I have failed here also. Please guide me. How should I do? And please don't you repeat it. So this is something I like to point about the leader, how I see in the urban local bodies. and about BRTS, you are telling to them, and let me be clear about diamond. 80% of the diamond in the world are polished in Surat. Not, it is a very fair chance. So that is, I'm taking this chance. And about BRT, we started from a scratch. We started only in 2009. We started with 20,000. At present, we have 275,000 riders pre-COVID per day. And it is a very decent figure if you look to the speed that we have implemented. While number of cities in India are still struggling for a decent public transport, Surat has very successfully implemented the longest BRTS as well as city bus in the state service. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a lot of, your point about capacity is raising a lot of questions from the audience. Maybe to close off this sequence, I'll just put one of them on and have you, Dr. Pandya, but also the other panelists react. You were pointing out that a lot of ULBs lack capacity. One of the questions is should India and how could India create a cadre of city managers in a structured way? It's something that exists in France. I don't know if there's a South African take on this question as well, but yeah, Dr. Pandya, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, and if the other panelists then want to take the floor, please feel free.
I think Raj will have a better answer to this. He's more confident for answering.
My experience, I've come from outside the system. But what I always tell is that this is not an entry-level job. People can't walk into Indian government anywhere. It'll take you 2-3 years to figure out where is the corporation building in the first place. It's so complicated. I'm not exaggerating. You'll be totally lost in the system. By the time you figure out who is Mr. Dr. Rajesh Pandya, it'll take you 3 years. Etc., right? So I think this is a serious problem in India, and Rajesh has brought up absolutely a critical piece. How do we build a cadre? I think there is no choice but to have hands-on experience, because no matter how much theory we do, how many seminars we do, and all of us have attended millions of seminars. Everybody understands the theory of urban this and that. Indian conditions, unless there is hands-on experience, you are lost. So I think from a smart city point of view, I think there's some very interesting initiatives have started, and audience and AFD and others may want to take into consider from internship all the way to trying to bring people laterally into the system, so that your expertise may be in health, it may be in water and so on. How do we bring people into the system and utilize your skills? So it will take, honestly, it will take a so-called expert in a subject to come into the system. It will take you at least 2-3 years to figure out where does your theory plug into the current system, and understand what has been tried. Like Rajesh pointed out, there's a lot of trial and failures also where we need to learn from. BRT as being a perfect example. Surat has succeeded and done amazing work. There are many cities which have tried or are too afraid to try, because there are only thing you will hear is that stories of utter failure, and that stops bureaucrats from even trying to do a BRT, for example, just as an example. So I think not only do we need to do standardization, learning from other people, travel abroad to see. I'm a big fan of travel in the sense that every bureaucrat, every city engineer should travel abroad. Only then they will realize that there is an alternate possibility out there. And it's very important that other city engineers, other city people come here and face-to-face explain. For example, Rajesh should come to Chennai and explain what are his learnings from BRT, because we are considering BRT in Chennai. And when people hear from a practicing bureaucrat and saying that, look, don't do this, we got thrashed by public when we tried this, etc., only then the city's confidence, city's motivation goes up. Otherwise, it's all theory, it's all nice on color pictures, and on paper, everything looks beautiful. So I think cadre-wise, I think we need to bring in especially younger people into the system and give them hands-on projects so that they are in neck deep in the mess that we have, and then get out of it. That's the only way I can think of.
What I take home is the importance of being aware that this is a tough job. that you need expertise, but you need also the understanding, the appreciation of the institutional environments. That there is opportunities to learn from other cities, international exposure that you were talking about, and the opportunity of bringing in skill sets into the municipal administration.
I'll also quickly add a certain kind of personalities, because it's not for everybody. In the sense, initially, it's one thing to go into a well-established system and do your part. Currently, if you come into an Indian system, you need a lot of resilience and a lot of ability to focus and, not get frustrated that easily, because every turn you will get frustrated. It's not the fault of bureaucrats or the system. That's how it is. So I think not only your technical expertise, but more importantly, a certain kind of personality that helps thrive in chaos, but at the same time, you're able to focus, you're able to be persistent, to make sure that you, no matter what, you take the project to the end goal.
I wanted to react on one of the points on failure, which I think there is a growing appreciation for the fact that failure is as important in lesson as best practices or good practices. It's not always easy to put to understand the causes of failure or to put it on the table for others to unpick. Vidya, maybe phrasing the question a bit differently. In your experience with UDC across the projects that you've worked on for the past 10 or 50 years, do you think that do you have experience, or do you think that good strong urban projects that have promising maybe urban projects can fail without strong individual leaders or strong leadership, and how to avoid that?
So I want to I'll come to your question, but I want to sort of segue from what Dr. Pandya said and also what Raj said. I love the honesty with which Dr. Pandya spoke, and I think in fact I think honesty is a very, very valuable trait. Like you've got to be able to talk about your failures, and as an extension of that, I would even say to an extent of vulnerability, right? Like it's always that as a leader, you're expected to not show vulnerability, and I think doesn't have to be that way. I think in fact, if you're able to share your vulnerability, it kind of strengthens you in many ways, because as he pointed out, only if you share your failures, and put it out and you're able to talk about it and discuss about it, can you actually fix it. It's like it's not something for one person to fix, right? And to answer your question, it really doesn't go back to like one person, like the one leader cannot. I don't think we're in an era of this one leader phenomena that this person knows everything and can solve all the problems and fix everything. I think it's about being honest about your own limitations, about your own vulnerabilities, about your own failures. Also, is a very, very critical part of being in this space, in this space of the urban ecosystem that we're talking about. I'm going back to Raj's point about the personality. Like I agree. Yes, I do agree that it requires a lot of resilience and sort of that ability to not get bogged down in disillusion. But what I feel is missing, and I say this purely from experience, is that there isn't an enabling environment that allows more people to become resilient like that. I think the burnout happens, and I think Dr. Pandya said there is a need for capacity building, but I also think that there is a need for enabling environments and to create those enabling environments for more people to come and be part of this process. It's as if you're saying it's survival of the fittest, and only the ones that are most resilient and can brave this and do all of this will survive and can effect change here. I don't think we can afford that anymore. I strongly believe we need many more people to come and start thinking about this and believing that you can contribute in a meaningful manner. So I think there is a need for capacity building, but there's also a need for enabling environments, and this is across the spectrum. I would say, as contentiously also that even in the institutional frameworks, you need an enabling environment. I have seen that, I've seen a lot of bureaucrats, the IAS officers, who are very enabling with their staff, who acknowledge, expertise when they see it, who acknowledge someone's skill set when they see it, and nurture that and allow it to be nurtured. And I think, but then it gets restricted to that particular individual during that particular individual's tenure, right? I think there's a systemic issue which doesn't allow that, flat hierarchy that allows everyone to sort of participate in a manner that is useful for us. The one of the major drawbacks, I would say, is that sort of strong being rooted in the hierarchy, which and I think that is something that we'll probably take us some time to overcome. But it's always heartening to see an exception to the rule sometimes, when working with cities, and you see that, look, this is a team that's working as a team, and it's not working as this person's team. They're working as a project team or a city team. And I'm going to take this into the cities program now, and I know you wanted me to sort of talk about that, and I think it's we try to nurture this as well. I know Amit, who is my co-mentor on the 2 cities that I'm working with, we're always, looking for people on the team that are able to contribute, and we're always encouraging, them to sort of like put out their voice. We're always conscious of who's talking in the room and who's not talking in the room, and we want to hear everyone, say what they have to say, because, there's moments of brilliance that comes out unexpectedly, and that will happen only if everyone feels comfortable in the room to speak up. So yeah, I want to just emphasize the need for nurturing environments, enabling environments, because we can't do this darn quick sort thing anymore. Like, we've got to, we need more people on the force. Things are getting way more complex than we can handle. We really need all hands on deck, and starting from a young age. And this is also one of the reasons why we work with high school kids and college students, is because you've got to start building that awareness and nurturing that desire to effect change by being and by allowing them to have a voice. I think the first starting point is just allowing them to have a voice.
Thank you. I think the points of getting more people to be part of the process, to put out their voice, and to make sure that there is beyond what a specific individual can bring to a team, and beyond having within a specific tenure, this kind of let all flowers bloom moments. How do we institutionalize enabling environments? Maybe Ashraf, I wanted to turn to you on this question. Maybe link it to issues around diversity. How do we enable? How do we get, as we just said, more people to have a voice? How do we build, promote emerging urban leaders? How do we make sure that we're being mindful of who's talking and who's not talking? Do you have any examples from Nelson Mandela Bay, from your organization, on how you try to nurture? And maybe there's a couple of questions on the chat on how do we make sure that there are, the institutions, but also the resources to make sure that, these emerging leaders have a voice around the table.
Yes, thank you. May I just respond to some of the other issues first? And I'll come to that.
Yes, of course.
The issue of strong leadership, and do we still need a strong leader, and so forth in a complex environment. I think that's an important point, an important question. And I'd like to say yes and no, like any good planner. No, because the big man syndrome, and I'm going to say man even though there was Indira Gandhi in India, the big person syndrome that came with modernism, whether it was the Soviet Union or America or most parts of the colonies, I think that is something that is on the wane, and I think we must not encourage. The idea of a strong leader to lead is very important because, as Vidya said, people look up to you. You need to be able to engage. You need to be able to create a space for people to engage and so forth. So I think the postmodern approaches to leadership, which led to the new public service, which many of you might know about, I think that's the problem. In that it tried to corporatize public management and public services in a way in which the private sector has done it. And I think that has failed. Linked to that, there is a very strong differentiation which I make between leadership and being in charge. So you could be a manager, you could be an executive director, you can be a CEO, it doesn't make you a leader. And I think that leadership qualities are cultivated over time. I don't think I could have done this job 10 years ago, even though I was another kind of leader doing other kind of stuff. And I think the leadership must be linked to the outcomes and the impact the organization wants to make. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the boards, the councillors, and whoever it is, the corporators, to ensure that they know what type of person they're looking for in a particular post. Sometimes you need a manager. Sometimes you need a leader. For example, I know when I leave this post, they'll need more of a manager to continue to see things through. Whereas when they brought me in here, they wanted me to change things and to take it to another level. And I think that's what we've done. So I'd like to now come to the other point about leadership, and that is arrogance. Now, leaders often fall foul and become susceptible to accusations of arrogance, even though they are not arrogant. The fact that you know what you're talking about, the fact that you are confident that about what you are doing, the fact that you are able to steer, that you have history and experience behind you, gives you a certain level of confidence, a certain level of gravitas in the way in which you express it. The people who call you arrogant, particularly those who work in the public system would know this, the people who call you arrogant are the ones who themselves don't perform or want to hide their own lack of performance. And I think that because of those kinds of stuff, leadership is a very lonely experience. And I think people need to begin to engage around what it means to be a leader as an individual thing. So even though you need to be able to express your vulnerabilities, that is very important because it's part of authenticity in leadership. The loneliness of being up there, and I will give you an example. I phoned one of my staff members today. She was away. We've got a very skeleton crew, and we have people coming in on schedules. And when it was her turn to come in, she didn't last an hour. She had an anxiety attack and left. I called her, today actually, I called her again to find out how she is and so on and so forth. And she says, you know, Ashraf, I appreciate you calling me, but I can only imagine what you are dealing with, because I'll tell you what we are dealing with here. We are dealing with a municipality that doesn't have a legal city manager. The mayor is not legal, supposedly. The administration is in chaos, and they own us. We perform better than they perform, and we have to account to them. And I think those are the kinds of things that often create the kinds of tensions and impact on service delivery and organizational success. And then linked to that is that leaders must be prepared to fail. If you are not prepared to fail, you are not prepared to lead. Because it's the fear of failure, particularly in the public sector, that makes the public sector as vulnerable as it is. So I'd like to be able to use that to introduce the issue of diversity and complexity and things in our organization. So South Africa, as you know, has its own apartheid history, and someone like me would have been categorized as Indian, others would have been categorized as African, others colored, and others white. But within that, you get further subgroups and all kinds of silly. It just shows the stupidity of race. But you've got to be able to bring those things together in development work. So often, even though ours is an urban renewal agency, and the urban renewal is mostly in old white towns, or what was the white towns and towns which were declared white afterward, which were mixed before apartheid. The challenge from particularly councillors is, well, why aren't you working in African areas, which we are, by the way. So we've had to completely review our mandate on how we interpret urban renewal because you've got to be inclusive. You've got to bring in people who are marginalized and things like that. So the ideas around diversity and leadership are important, because when you bring that into your organization, because in South Africa we have people of all kinds, we have affirmative action policies, we have all kinds of policies trying to deal with our past. And in developing the diversity in your communities, you also need to be able to develop diversity in your organization, because once you develop diversity, you get a diversity of opinions. And here's the challenge to leadership. Are you prepared to accept that diversity? Because you might not be able to relate to it. I might not be able to relate to the views coming out of an African township, even though I know it intellectually, I know it theoretically, I see it every day, I experience it every day, but I don't live that experience every day. So my staff coming up with development challenges and development suggestions arising out of those lived experiences are what leaders need to be able to be using to formulate their programs and things like that.
Thank you, Ashraf, for this perspective. It's a great transition to the last part of the conversation before we tackle some of a lot of questions have emerged, which was around this issue of diversity, bringing specifically reflections around gender. One of the elements that has emerged as part of the reflection around the COVID responses across the world has been there's been a lot of press on whether individual female leaders, so countries that are led like Germany, like New Zealand, like Finland, like Taiwan, led by women prime ministers, seem to have fared better in the COVID response. And a couple of the insights from that emerging conversation has been that the presence of around the theme that the presence of a female leader, could be a signal for political institutions that are more inclusive and that bring values of diversity. So, how does that play out in the urban space? Raj, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that specifically in Chennai, in the smart city, or in your experience with Chennai City Connect. Do women leaders have different or specific leadership styles, and how valuable is it possible to encourage those standpoints, and how have you done it in your organization?
I think, diversity is absolutely important, because no matter how empathetic you and I may be, we cannot be representing, even on a simple project, people who we are not, right? So simple example I would give you, if you ask people, is it safe for young girls to play in public places? Most people say, yeah, of course, why don't they go and play out there? But if you ask a woman or a woman who has studied these issues, they would give you so many amazing different perspectives to show how the world, how the little girl may perceive the world, for example. So even if you observe and study, and if you're empathetic, you want to do the best, unless you bring in people with other opinions and other experiences, we will never be able to do projects which are complete. So I can proudly say that, at least in the Smart City projects, we've tried hard. We have not succeeded always, obviously. But in all our projects, we've tried very hard to, even though it's extra work, or it may be perceived as extra work, we do try to bring in as many voices as possible. But the problem is there are always time limitations, there are pressure to finish projects, etc., etc. But in general, and I take Vidya's point very seriously, that is, we have to slowly, as part of our work, not just doing projects and finishing projects, but also slowly start expanding that space where other people can come in and express. So, for example, if you're building a public space, because of my exposure to, for example, friends and colleagues from the disability community, we always try to see how do we bring them and ask, let's not pretend we know what a person in a wheelchair goes through. Let's not pretend what a visually impaired person may go through. Let's ask them. It's not easy, by the way. I don't want to make it sound easy. I'm not suggesting we have done amazing work or anything like that. But because people like Vidya and myself and all got exposed to groups, we were friends with them, it's in the back of the head that forces us to now think, even when I walk, even when I nothing to do with my work, even when I go up and down the steps or many of these badly designed buildings and places, I think of my friends who can't walk, for example, right? So I think that empathy is very important, but I think we should also be honest with us ourselves. We cannot simply say men and women, because all of us in this panel, I suspect, are upper class, upper middle class, rich, or well off. There's no way I can pretend that I can speak for the poor, even though I may think I know about the poor, I may think how people live in poverty and so on. I think that's where I think we need structures. When I say capacity, infrastructure, etc., it's not simply concrete and steel. It is also our ability to deal with, let's say, 10,000 people out there as citizens. It's easy for us to say we should have stakeholder meetings, we should have capacity building, we should have, public participation. That's a nice word, but institutional capacity to absorb ideas. So if 10,000 people give 10,000 opinions, do we have the capacity to absorb all that? And if, let's say, many of the ideas are counter to what a city needs, let's assume later because of global warming, we want to do A. And if people say, I want B, how much time are you willing to spend to convince the public, hey, B is bad for Earth, let's do A, right? This is see, sometimes all of us intellectuals underestimate the problem. And I hope in going down the future, not only diversity, but expanded view of diversity, expanded view of public participation, and not simply say it, but also think seriously, how does a Dr. Pandya deal with 10,000, 100,000 people in Surat? If everybody says, forget BRT, I don't want BRT, I want my car to go fast on my road, what kind of a foolish project is this which takes away all the road space and gives it to some bus when I am stuck in traffic? How are we going to argue with that, right? How many years are we going to spend arguing and convincing the public? So I think institutional capacity. So I never think in terms of individuals, even in my own managerial style. I don't think in terms of, I think in terms of individuals in that sense. In a managerial capacity, I say, what are the capabilities of this person? And this person may be a man, woman, a poor, or a person from North India, South India, etc., etc. What experience do they bring in as an individual? How can we use best? But in terms of a city, we cannot think in terms of the one strong man or strong woman will stand on a table and give speeches and convince the public. It takes painful day-to-day interaction with public, which is very important in a democracy, and to convince the public about the direction, the vision, the projects, and take input, etc. So I think the capacity is a major problem. Again, we are coming back to the capacity problem. Capacity building, even in terms of diversity, etc., is very, very important. And I think it's time we actually do serious stuff about it.
Thank you so much. Ashraf, you wanted to come in, please?
Yes, if I may just come in, I think some the speakers have introduced some points which I thought would be quite useful. The thing about leadership is that you want to make an impact. I think most people could probably run an organization quite well, even though that organization is meant to achieve certain things. It's not automatic that organization will achieve those things, because unless that organization is led in a way where it is impactful, it is simply going to be another organization that's well run, but not necessarily making an impact. And I think that's something that needs to be considered. However, when you do that, when you seek to make a difference and to make an impact, you're coming across the status quo. Now, whether that status quo is a recalcitrant administration, public sector, whether that status quo are the vehicle drivers who want to go faster instead of having buses, whether the status quo are the people who are embedded in informal waste collection, or whatever it is, you will always have the status quo. And you need to challenge the status quo. And therein lies the difficulties of leadership. Which brings me to another point around leadership, and that is, we all glibly talk about development. But again, if you look at the modernist period, it was ideologically led. Communist, socialist, apartheid, Zionism in Israel, capitalism. There was an ideological position that people took, even though they led the same way, they all took ideological positions. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of postmodernism, you suddenly find what is it Francis Fukuyama, who has now gone back on this view arguing about the end of history. And the end of history implies that there's no ideology that drives you. So as planners, as urbanists and all that, what's the ideology behind this? Do we only view, do we only live by a set of principles based on inclusivity, clean streets, better, efficient transport, and so on and so forth? Or is there something that we want to achieve in society that changes it fundamentally from what it is right now? And that's also part of the status quo. So I think the big questions in development are not merely how can we deliver and how can we be more efficient and effective in delivery. It's why are we doing it? And what impact do we want to make in doing it?
Maybe a way to reformulate it is: can you be an effective leader if you don't have a political, in the positive sense of the term, a political agenda, a political vision? Dr. Pandya, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to go back to you. There's been a lot of Raj was just speaking to the to the importance of capacity building, and there's been a lot of questions on the chat. Especially regarding and an overwhelming, there's been a poll with an overwhelming response of, how do we make sure that ULBs, municipal administrations, earmark budgets to train, to skill up their staff, and therefore, support, nurture the leaders of tomorrow. Could you speak to how Surat Municipal Corporation handles this issue? Do you have a budget on capacity building? What type of skilling programs do you think would be the most relevant, most needed in your organization? And what has already been done? And how would you, how would you take it forward if you could on this issue of training and building up leaders within municipal administration?
Yes, you're very much correct. First issue, everyone, whenever you talk of anything, first issue is of finance. How are we going to finance it? Who is going to finance it? But if you want to do something, finance is not an obstacle. You can always find a way out of it. Capacity building cannot be stopped by the in lieu of finance. Yes, the urban local bodies, they are small bodies, so they cannot afford costly any things that are done. But if you look to big cities like Chennai, Delhi, Bombay, they have big budget, they have big projects, so they can afford to employ super specialists for their projects. But small or medium cities cannot do that. So that is why they are lacking capacity. Now, how we can make up that? One is what Raj was telling, we have to give them exposure. Exposure by letting them visit other places, how the other cities are doing, how the other people are doing, or let other people come to their city and tell you, yes, you are doing okay, this is your problem, how you should modify it. This is exposure. But where we are lacking, people think sarkari kharche se Paris ghumne ja raha hai. That is going to be a very big problem. We don't expect, if a person goes out to visit cities, the allegation is they want to have a holiday on, but that is not correct. So we have to promote this. We have to encourage people to go and visit other cities. Go and see Pune, how they are doing the BRTS, why they are failing. Go and see Bogota, go and see Barcelona, how they are doing. What is the difference between Istanbul BRT and your BRT? Let us learn from them. Every city, every place you have something to learn. You may go to Himalayas, you may go to Sri Lanka, you may go to rural area, but you will learn something. So one thing is let people go and learn from others and encourage people to think out of box. If you want a simple water supply project, don't always go this line, this tank, this pressure. If anyone comes with an innovative solution, something to add, some value to add, encourage him. Let us think, okay, try it. It may not be success, but encourage people to think out of box. I am not saying let them implement, but let at least encourage them to think out of box. Now, in the days of technology, we can visit number of sites, we have number of applications, we have number of cities they have there. So we can, let us look to them. If anyone brings some solution, let us encourage. No, let us encourage them. And one more thing I'd like to add is, let us have technical expert outside support. If we cannot employ them, we have got number of consultants. I'll not name any, but there are number of consultants very big. They are the capacity. Let us take advantage of them and have the input from them. Maybe Maslow's pyramid, I'll give an example. One was how the people expect. Initially, something we were fighting for only our existence. Okay, let us give them potable water. Now the people's expectation is more. Give me 135 LPCD. When you give them, now still their expectation rise. They go to the top of the pyramid. Give me 24/7. So this is where the people's expectation is rising. And any solution, any capacity, it is not same for me or for you, for everyone. It changes from time and place. It has got spatial and temporal differences. What was good yesterday may not be good today and will not be correct tomorrow also. What is applicable to me may not be applicable to Raj, or it may not be applicable in Africa. So we have to look the solutions, find the correct one that is applicable, and that is the way we can go ahead and increase our capacity.
So much, Dr. Pandya. Lots of reactions to your comment that you don't funding allocation is not necessarily the main constraining factor. So maybe we're slowly kind of winding down. Vidya, I wanted to hand you the floor, maybe kind of reacting to, again, on this issue of capacity building. How do you create, whether in your practice or with your clients, spaces for people to learn? Is that necessary in terms of long-term change? How do you encourage that in the projects that you mentor?
I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we've got to build capacity, right? And one of the things that we also do is work with municipal corporations to build their capacity. In fact, currently at the moment, we're working with the Coimbatore Municipal Corporation to build their capacity for non-motorized transport. But it's also, I think, I think there needs to be a change in the way we think of capacity building, right? It's not just like you go and teach them something, or they attend a webinar or some seminar, and it's the theoretical part of it, and and then everyone has ticked a box. They've got a certificate, or they've finished attending the training, and they've whatever. I think there's been quite a bit of capacity building that has happened in a way that is not effective. In fact, after so many years, I really believe we need to revisit the way we're looking at capacity building. Like we need to rethink that. It needs to be reinvented, and it needs. And I'm going to say, a very cliched thing for UDC is that it needs to be participatory. I think the learning needs to be to some extent desired by the people that we want to build capacity for, right? Like they need to see the value in that capacity building. So, for instance, I think Mr. Pandya, he brought up a very interesting point about like how if people are traveling outside, there's this whole thing of they visited a foreign country on government money, and then what came out of it, right? Like, but if we were able to actually demonstrate, what was the takeaway of these people that visited these places, like if there was a structured way in which to derive learnings and translate that on the ground and to show it as a tangible outcome. At the end of the day, you've got to be accountable. It's not that, it's possible that some people just went for a trip and came back, right? Like, I'm assuming the worst case, but I think that those questions come up because, we're just demanding accountability and we want to see what came out of it, right? At the end of the day, I think all of us want better cities to live in. Nobody is going to counter that, right? So I think like we've got to rethink the way we are building capacity. Like, is it like it probably needs to be tailored to the people that we're building capacity for. That's just one very simple way to put it, right? Like if you're working with the municipal engineers on a particular aspect, you need to first assess what is it that they know and what is it that they want to know, right? And then how would they want to enhance that gap that has been identified? And first of all, whether they see it as a gap, and I think that's critical as well. Like, you know, they the first step towards learning is to also acknowledging that you don't know, right? Like, so you can't you can't like sort of thrust something on someone and then say that, okay, I made these people sit in a room and I told them a bunch of things for 7 days and capacity building is over. So in that sense, I think we need to be a little bit more creative about capacity building. And I'm going to go back to the cities program again. And I think the model of mentorship that we have on the cities program does allow for that. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that from the mentor pool, we all know exactly what we need to do, but I think there is cross learning. Like, we're also learning as mentors on how to mentor, and also in the process getting mentored in some ways on a lot of other aspects as well, right? Like, so there is that sort of acceptance that we're all in a learning process through the program. It's a very interesting model, to have mentors assigned to a city who are working on a very specific project and who are able to sort of allow the team to do their work, but also guide them where a course correction is required. So in that sense, I think the way it is structured, personally, I'm very happy with it. I would endorse it, and of course, we still have to wait for another 2 or 3 years to know if it really worked. But I think as a process, it seems to be on the right track. Just to sort of give one example of capacity building that could work. I'm gonna segue a little bit, because as people were talking, like, there were a bunch of thoughts that came up, and I know you brought up the pandemic and the response, particularly from a gender perspective, with women leaders who demonstrated, success. I think it's important. One aspect of leadership that we've not covered so far is resourcefulness, and I think this is across, right? Whether it's an institutional framework or in a private practitioner framework that I'm working in, like, resourcefulness is extremely important. Resourcefulness and agility as well. Like, you've got to be able to adapt to the situation, because things are changing very fast as well. Let's be honest about it. Like, you've got to be adaptive, you've got to be resourceful. I think personally for me, like, we have always worked in our office with very limited resources, like, whether it's people or money or whatever it is, like, or even time for that matter. We've always worked with very less resources. It puts a challenge on you, but it also, like, really pushes you to fire on all pistons effectively as well. And I think building that capacity for resourcefulness is also very critical. Going back to capacity building, very critical to build that capacity for being resourceful at all levels, if we're going to get through this. I'll stop here if you want to take the gender stuff later, but I
think
would like to.
We're somewhat running out of time, so I'm going to ask maybe a concluding statement from each of you on one of the themes. If you want to take it up on gender now, Vidya, feel free, and then I'll.
Sure. So I bat for equity, equality, for sure. We know we have the leaders, the women leaders that we've been seeing in the news. I mean, big fan of many of them. It's really amazing to see all the work that's happened. But I also, and again, I speak from personal experience. I really believe that the two genders have very different styles of working and that they're extremely complementary. I personally enjoy working a lot with the opposite gender because it's a balance, and I think it's a skill that needs to be developed by both genders to be able to work together. I like it's not that one gender is worse or the other is the same, but I really think that you could be a lot more stronger if you learned how to work together, and again that's something that needs to be cultivated as well, is this complementarity of the skills and acknowledging the complementarity of the skills, that I bring this to the table and you bring this to the table. And I think a lot of my very successful, collaborations or partnerships have been, with a mixed group team. Like I wouldn't recommend working with an all woman team or an all male team. Like I think it's very one directional, one dimensional, and could be very detrimental. But it is something that needs to be cultivated, and I like to believe that the women leaders that we're seeing, have managed to balance that. Kudos to them for doing that as well. To balance a team which is with multi-gender, and they've managed to pull it through. Not taking any credit away from them, but I do believe strongly that we've got to learn to work together.
And I think that came across also from from the earlier interventions on the need to have diversity from a gender's perspective, from an intergenerational perspective. You were speaking to the importance of bringing youth on board. People who are differently able. Raj was speaking to the importance of bringing those perspectives. So having maybe a lens on the diversity and the inclusion. Maybe to wrap up, there's an interesting, there are lots of interesting questions. I won't be able to go through them one by one, but some of them we've already discussed. A lot of the questions on capacity building, financing of capacity buildings, making sure capacity building is efficient, and you were talking about that, Vidya, just now. There's a question on transparency, and it's something maybe we haven't touched upon as much. So I'm gonna focus on that as our kind of closing remarks. Do you think that forced interventions to bring in trust and transparency in public administration affects leadership styles? Are leaders different when they're in the public eye, and should be pushing for transparency in terms of documentation being made available, in terms of information, access to information on budgets, on impacts? Raj, I don't know if you want to react to that question from the audience.
I think over the last 10, 15, 20 years, I've been kind of associated with this. I do see a distinct change in the style of when you say transparency, we're talking about bureaucracy and so on. I'm pleasantly surprised how much more people are willing to put information out there, whether it's data, plans, etc. We're not perfect. We're a long, long way to go. But 15 years ago, if you suggest something like, why don't we put this out there on a website, people panic, think the worry is that media will take it, misinterpret it, or people will go crazy on the road or something. But there's increasingly willingness to share, and at least whatever we can from a smart city point of view, we made video. We got quite a bit distant. We've made videos, we've Facebook, Twitter, as much as possible. And I think the goal should be to more than simply putting stuff out there. The question is, how do we leverage technology and other opportunities to start explaining the rationale behind projects, the vision? For example, did this project help you in any way to reduce carbon, for example? Or instead of simply saying we put this new fancy lamppost or a fancy solar panel out there, is there a way to quantify and say, look, this is the amount of carbon we did? So coming back to that very important debate that Indian cities are going to have between a BRT and car, for example. Everybody's first instinct is to say, make sure you widen the road so cars can go fast. That's a natural instinct. How do we use transparency and beyond to communicate so that ultimately what is the objective? We want to make the city good. And it's not simply to sit and read documents. It is to make city livable for the rich, the poor, the middle class, taking environment, social equity and diversity, etc. into account. So we should go beyond transparency and actually start helping people digest it, because we have limited attention span also. If animal rights activists say that is an important topic, transport experts will say, no, wait a minute, transport is more important. So in an average person's mind frame, there's only so many seconds, so many minutes, so many days possible to sit and absorb all these things. So I think we need to start using whatever we can to start communicating with public so that we can achieve higher goals of the city and not simply look at it as a project or how much budget we put it out there. And at some point, it's like people are going to say, yeah, so what? I mean, you're doing a bad project. What's the point of showing me the budget? So we need to go far beyond transparency and start actually genuinely communicating so that it's a two-way communication, but more importantly, the general awareness of what a city needs to do, whether it's climate change, whether it's child safety, whatever it may be. There are n number of things for a city. We need to go beyond transparency.
Go beyond transparency and create conditions for engagement that allow some consensus to emerge on the vision. I think I would link it to what Ashraf was saying, that you need to have, you need to be seeking to deliver change, to have a political vision, and how do you create a consensus around what needs to happen, around the objectives of your intervention. Not just the content. Dr. Pandya, there's a question that I'd like to pose you as a kind of closing remarks. So we've been talking a lot about the conditions for driving change and the creating enabling environments, creating accountability, having a nurturing or diverse leadership also. One of the questions regards the time scale in which those changes can happen. The political leaders have relatively short tenure, 3 to 5 years. Bureaucrats, will often have very quick rotations. Technocrats have longer tenure, longer experience, but not necessarily the same, the same power, the same resources to drive change. So how do you manage the mismatch between the long term in which change needs to happen and the short term of political tenures? Is giving more power to, if I quote the question, more power to an opportunity to the technocrats for long term planning and execution? Is that the solution? How do you manage this mismatch in your administration?
I think they have pointed out correctly that difference in time span or their tenure. But pointing out that technocrats have the least power, I do not agree. Technocrats have the most power, but they are afraid to utilize their power. They are unable to convince the political leaders. They have the power. Who prepares the estimates? Who executes? The political people are not going to execute. They did not have the technical knowledge to whether to have a water supply 135 LPCD or 1 LPCD. It is us. We convinced them or we misguided them. The technocrats have the power, and they should go on building their own capacities. I'll just take your leave and give my own example. When I joined Surat Municipal Corporation in the year 1886, I was just a BE Civil graduate. With study, I increased my capacity. I did more education without finance. Someone is asking about the finance. Did not. Surat Municipal Corporation did not finance me. I did my own finance and I invested my own time. I did my ME, I did my LLB, I did my MBA finance, and I did my PhD research. Why? I wanted to increase my capacity. When in the year 2008, the concept of BRTS came, I was a part of the team. We went to a number of seminars, as you were telling, Raj. Go number of seminars. We got the concept, but I could not visualize, even as a planner, urban planner, I couldn't be, how is it possible? No. They are just bluffing. I am a part of government team. I just go and say, yeah, if it is come, we'll do it. But then I went to Bogota and Curitiba. When I saw that, oh my God, it is possible. Now I am the most aggressive advocate of BRTs in the whole country. If there is an argument, I will be the first to be very aggressive. Please be cautious. I am a very aggressive argument for BRTS. If there are some loopholes, I understand. There are some shortcomings. There are shortcomings for every system. So this is what I say, how we increase. So we technocrats, we had the power to convince our city. Pune has failed, let it fail. Delhi has failed, let it fail. But we did it. We convinced our projects were delays for 2 to 3 years. No, everyone is failing. Pune is failing. What should we do? We said, no, we will do it. We will be able to do it. And we convinced our political bodies and did it. So political leaders are there. We have the power. We must execute our power. We should not be afraid of failing. If we fail, let us fail. No issues. But we will always succeed in the second try, third try. If at once you don't succeed, try again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very inspiring. Let's not be afraid of failing. Maybe Ashraf, last question from the audience for you. Question about, we've talked a lot about how exposure to international example, has inspired, Curitiba inspiring Surat for the and Dr. Pandya for the BRT. Question is, we believe pick, choose, and implement without much research, considering local conditions and requirements. So how do you localize the learnings and the failures that you see from elsewhere? How have you taken that on board in Nelson Mandela Bay? Of course, if there's any concluding thoughts, because there's been lots of themes that have emerged, so feel free to share.
Thank you. No, thank you. I'm glad somebody asked that question, because I was actually going to respond to it in some way. Firstly, I'd just like to make 3 quick points. One, on the economy, women leadership. Economies are social activities, and society is controlled by men. And men design the world of work, and they tolerate women in it. Now, if we're going to change the world of work, we've got to change the way the economy works, we've got to change the way society works. And I think the development work that we continuously do is what changes and undermines the status quo and will eventually change the state of work. That doesn't mean that we mustn't be activists about it. Because I think all of us have worked with good men, and all of us have worked with bad women and all kinds of people. So the issue isn't a gendered one, in my view. It's about what kind of leadership do we need? And I think that's something worth considering. On the issue of transparency, South Africa has an extremely well-codified democratic constitutional system. And I always say we took our democratic accountability from Cuba. We took our economic policy from America. And we took our social development policy from Scandinavia. And it's a complete interesting mixture, but it's hard work. Even though the right to be consulted and the right to be participated, right down from a development plan, a budget, and before a project is even started, before a spade hits the ground, people have the right to be consulted. A lot of those things don't always happen, or they happen in a manner which undermines the project. So the issues around transparency is not merely about public participation. It's about ensuring that the public themselves and the process of public participation allow for the public themselves, and the gatekeepers don't block the transparent process and things. So that's the point on that. On the issue of policy work and the question that was asked, the problem with globalization is that you can have the same conversation, and I think Rajesh has made that point, that he got convinced when he went to Bogota and Curitiba. Now, you can sit in Curitiba, you can sit in Cape Town, you can sit in New Delhi, you can sit in London, you can sit in any country in the world, whether it is South American country, European country, Asian country, anywhere in the world, and you'll have the same conversation about development. And you'll all talk about BRT, we'll all talk about participation, we'll all talk about inclusion, we'll all talk about a whole range of stuff. But none of those bear context to the people, to the countries the people are having those conversations are from. And I think that's the big challenge that we have. How do we begin to indigenize policy? How do you begin to understand that, okay, so BRT worked in Curitiba, and by the way, BRT started in Curitiba when Brazil was run by the dictatorship of the generals. And that guy, whatever Jamie Lerner, was able to go and do what he was able to do because he had connections with the generals. There was no democratic system in there. India's a democracy. To get that system going, you have to go through a whole range of things. Besides that, who says the BRT is the best system for India? By the way, we have the same issues here. Who says the BRT is the best system for South Africa? Who says the urban structures that have been imposed on this corridors and nodes concept is the best, given that there are completely different approaches to urban structure that have emerged over thousands of years of urbanization. 11,000 years of urbanization have given us different types of urban structure. So the question is, why are we, particularly those from the colonies, allowing ourselves to be hamstrung by adopting policies which often bear little resemblance to the local context? And I think the challenge to us as policymakers and as urbanists is to begin to look at that. And maybe we should ask ourselves, should the people of the colonies not begin to get together and say, maybe there's another way to approach policy? And I think that the internationalization of development policy is problematic and feeds into the neoliberalism and inequalities created by globalization in the 21st century. And I think that's something that we're going to have to look at as we move forward. And thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. So I'm looking at Swapnil. I think we'll close it there. What I would like maybe to take from this conversation is something that I hadn't framed at all in the preparatory work, which was around these values. We talked about the leadership strategies. We talked about leadership qualities, but I think what came out most strongly was a number of values that all of our speakers, passionately recommended. Values of empathy, values of authenticity, integrity, commitment to change, political awareness, of course, a capacity to engage a network of networks and to bring together actors. But yeah, I'd like to close maybe with these leadership values, which I think we can I'll take. That's what I take home from this conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. I think the topic was allowed us to do that. Thank you so much to the four panelists for your time, for your contribution. One of the closing comments from the audience is grab the reins. So a call for empowerment and way to live those values as urban leaders wherever you are active as well. So thank you so much again, and Swapnil, I'll hand the floor over to you to close the webinar.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you Clemence for an amazing, very well structured session and for hosting this for us. Thank you to all the panelists. It was a great discussion, and also your reflections on urban leadership have definitely, I think, given a lot of food for thought to each one of us. A lot of things that I'm sure I'm going to go back and journal from this discussion. So personally, I mean, adding to what Clemence was just talking about values, I think leadership isn't about a title or a position. It's more about developing those set of skills and values over the course of your career. And no matter where one is positioned in their career, one can always have a vision for themselves as leaders. So I would end it at that. Thank you everyone for joining once again, and see you all at the next webinar. Thank you.